What's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. The following is a conversation that I got to have with a really close friend of mine named Jon Woolner, who is a pastor at a local church in the area and a guy that I've just been grabbing coffee and lunch with as often as I can. He's just an amazing conduit of wisdom and a really brilliant thinker about all things spiritual, but especially the moment that the world is kind of in, and especially the United States are in, as far as Christianity and spirituality goes. And a lot of my interest in chatting with him is around those kind of ideas, because he is a deep thinker in the realm of theology, but also kind of sociology and how people work and think. And what an amazing guy. He's literally so cool. So I'm sure you guys are going to love this. Thank you guys again for tuning in. I'll be doing more interviews like this in the future, so please subscribe to make sure you stay tuned for them. And without further ado, let's get right into the conversation. Well, Jon, thanks for being here with me. Thanks for getting mic'd up and having one of the conversations that we've kind of already been in the midst of together.
Yeah.
I just figured this would be a cool relationship and conversation that we've been having to bring online. So thanks for being here, man.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
People probably don't know too much about you that are watching my YouTube channel. And Loki, they probably don't know that much about me either, because
Come on.
nobody follows me.
Come on.
So you are currently a pastor.
Let's back that up a little bit.
Sure.
No one is watching you. No one is following you.
Yeah.
Like, can we say, not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
I have like 250 subscribers on YouTube. So
I don't want to send out bad energy into the atmosphere. And like, I think people need to tune into you and that they need to listen to what you offer and the gift that you give. So like, even yesterday we were going to do this conversation and you gave me some excuse about your back hurting. And as a young man, my back was fine, by the way.
No, I just got cold feet, man.
No, it was okay. But I think I told Shannon, I said, Shannon, my wife, I was disappointed. I was like, man, I was really looking forward to having a conversation with Jon. And I thought we had to put it off until 2 weeks because I'm heading to Michigan to see my son. And then the surprise came. The surprise text came in, like, you want to do it today? I was like, yeah, I want to jump on this.
Yeah.
And I've expended a lot of energy today doing the thing that I do. And then we had this big party. Our community had a big party. And then, but you give me energy. So it felt like I think I can dig down deep and find something. So my hope is that we dig down deep and there's something really good down there.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. And same, likewise, feel super energized to be with you. And that was also part of it. It was like, I was out on a walk today and I was like, I can't wait 2 weeks to have this conversation. We just got to get it done, man. Okay. We'll do another one in 2 weeks probably, but we might as well just start now. So, thanks again. So first thing I just want you to be able to fill me in on more than you probably already have is your story as someone who's been in Christian ministry, someone who's been on stages in front of people, who's been organizing of gatherings, and you've seen a lot of different seasons with that. We probably don't have time for like the deep dive with that, but I'd love to know sort of like where you were, like where you kind of started on that journey, and then what are the
journey of the faith journey or the occupying like church space?
Let's go just as having it as your occupation first. Yeah. So where did you start and what were like the major bookmarks or sort of like key turning points for you along the way? And then if you could segue that into like kind of where you're at now, where your head's at. You don't have to like say everything with that, but I would just love whatever you feel like is relevant to share, just where you find yourself these days.
I want to say everything. So that we're clear.
Sure.
So I grew up in this church world.
Yep.
My dad's a minister and grew up, in the 70s, 80s church world. Dad was a big personality. And
is this kind of like Jesus movement type culture?
Kind of. I mean, that's going on. The Jesus movement is going on, but I was in Michigan. Okay. So it was like charismatic environment. And my dad was bigger than life, so he kind of knew everybody in the city, so that I couldn't get away with anything, right? Because like you're Ernie's son, and so I had a role to play. I was Ernie's son, so there was a sense in which I had to be this good guy, and it was pretty natural for me to be a good guy. It wasn't like I have to fake being good. I think there was an innate sense of like I'm a good person, and so growing up in that world where everybody's looking at you and you're always up in front of people. I've been on stages since I was a kid. So whether I wanted to be on stage or not, my parents would bring me on stage and people would look at me. So I grew up with people looking at me, which is a weird concept.
Yeah.
When you're up in front of people for your entire life, how do you like live into who you really are? How do you be your authentic self?
Right.
You're not asking yourself that question when you're a kid.
Yeah.
But as you grow and evolve, you start asking yourself that who am I apart from this? Who am I when I'm not on stage and I'm just interacting with people? That's a journey, and that's a weird space to occupy.
Sure.
But growing up in this, my dad was also good friends with the local priest. So in the city that we lived in, about 40,000 people, his best friend was a priest. So the evangelical world and the Catholic world didn't dance super well together. But my dad and Father Proust did. They were great friends, and they would switch pulpits. So my dad was a bit of a maverick. He liked to live out on the edge and push boundaries, which, as a kid, you're taking that in and you're watching your dad always pushing boundaries, even theological boundaries, like dipping into things. You're like, Dad, where are you taking this? And
your friends with priests?
he just didn't seem to care what people thought of him.
Sure.
Although he probably did, because he's human. But there was a sense that this maverick mentality, I'm just going to go out and we're going to make changes and we're going to dive into this. So that was my view of this is what a minister does. They live out on the edge and they push things and they make people uncomfortable. And then my mom, who is like a June Cleaver character. I don't know if you know June Cleaver. Your audience may not know June Cleaver, but that was like a Leave It to Beaver moment.
Okay.
It's a Leave It to Beaver reference, which was a television show.
Okay. That
June Cleaver was this ideal figure of a female, stay home and cook and clean and always looked beautiful. My mom is very elegant and she's poised and she's a concert pianist and just a beautiful human. Wonderful. Love my mom. But she kind of played this role of being the support to my dad, and that's how I grew up. So my mom's very attentive. My dad is a bit of a maverick, pushing the lines, but she worked for a rabbi. So her world was surrounded by Judaism, and then my dad's world is surrounded by the evangelical world, and then dipping into Catholicism and into mysticism. So that whole mystic piece was there in the beginning, which is like a massive part of my life now. Yeah. But I can see how I got there. Yeah. Because it's like in the seed bed of the soil. And Dad is living in that space. And so he's introducing me to St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Richard Rohr, these really dangerous people in the evangelical world because they're quiet and they're mystic and they don't live with great certainty. They live with wonder and curiosity, and they don't like want to nail everything down and have certainty in their faith. Yeah. So I grew up with that. So dipping into that world was a really natural world for me. So the idea of pushing boundaries, making people uncomfortable was like, well, yeah, that's what you do, isn't it? But I quickly realized that's not what people wanted. Right. And that's not necessarily what these Christian spaces want. So navigating my way through Christian spaces with like my ethos in my beginning was, push boundaries, be curious, stay open. You just never know. You can't nail God down into a category. And then I got to college and went to a very conservative Bible college where I had earrings and a mullet, right? Because I was rocking a mullet, John Caliguire.
It was cool in 2023.
They're coming back, by the way. I see children with them. And I'm like, that kid has a mullet. What is that thing on his head?
No, that's a thing these days.
It's a thing, right? Yeah. You probably could rock a mullet. Have you ever rocked one?
Well, actually, a few months ago, I had like a very barely a mullet just to dip my toe in a little bit. And I thought it was cool, but Gabrielle hated it. And
you were mullet curious.
I was I was a mullet seeker. Yeah.
A seeker of the great mullet. Yeah. Do I bow to this thing? Do I submit to it?
Yeah. No, I thought it was great, but Gabs was, she voted down on it. So
yeah, I'm with her on that. Yeah. I probably would have done the same thing.
Yeah, probably.
My son is 28. And during COVID, I think he started to explore the possibility of being mullet friendly, right? Mullet curious. You step into this thing, but it ended up like he just like the hair grew and you almost had like a Lord Farquaad moment from Shrek.
Yeah. I've had that moment many a time.
You're like, what
with
is
my
happening?
Hair. Yeah.
And the mustache comes out and it's just exploratory. When you're in your 20s, you're just trying like facial hair and your hairstyle.
Yeah, you have a Shrek phase.
Anyways,
for a little while.
we got from Richard Rohr to hair. So that was good. That was a nice jump.
For sure. But so you're in college, you had this mullet going.
I had a mullet. It was a very conservative school. And so I go into this space and they're telling me I have to cut my hair above my collar. Can't have earrings.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'll play by your rules. I'll go in and play by your rules because I'm in your school and they gave me a scholarship to sing. I was singing in this group and I got a scholarship to go to the school and study the Bible and study psychology and sociology. And it was a good experience.
Yeah.
But even in that conservative environment, there was something inside of me. It was like, you know, this is BS. Like, come on, you guys gotta like, come on, you gotta loosen up a little bit.
Right.
You're really tightening up and you're real sure about what
Gripping
you believe.
it real hard,
and
yeah.
I think so many people like get into those kinds of spaces and they don't know how to navigate it. They're like, well, this is what the authority figure is telling me. And so in order for me to kind of be a part of this, I have to submit to this and comply.
Totally. Well, sometimes there's very real consequences when you don't, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So that was an interesting period. I mean, I met my wife there. So, you know, that's what happens in Bible college. You meet somebody and then you get married.
Yep.
Because you're like, you can't have sex before marriage.
Right.
And you like got to do it right. You got to do it God's way.
For sure.
Whatever that means.
Quick.
It is super quick.
Your body's got a clock.
Yeah, you got to go, man. So we jumped in and we're still together today. We've had a few rocky moments, but I got through that and then decided to go to Fuller Theological Seminary. And Fuller is considered really dangerous by certain systems. So the school I was coming from, they're like, you know, you're going to lose your faith if you go there. I'm thinking, how weak is my faith exactly? I'm like, I'm going to lose it.
Right.
And what does that mean that I'm going to lose it? That I'm actually not going to believe in God anymore? I'm not going to believe in Jesus? Or is there something deeper? And I think when people operate in this fear element, there's always something underneath it that is controlling them. And they want predictability and they want safe feeling. So understanding where people are at, you're like, I'm not here to dismantle your life and your world, but I can't live in that world. Mm-hmm. I don't need things to be safe and predictable because what in life is really safe and predictable? I mean, there's not a lot.
No,
there's some things like hopefully you have relationships that are somewhat safe and predictable or you're just wacko in your head. But that going to Fuller brought up so much skepticism. Like Jon Woolner's going to Fuller. He is going off the deep end because everyone from this institution went to Dallas Theological Seminary.
Right, which is the Holy Land.
That's the Holy Land. Yeah, that's where you're supposed to go. They got the Bible locked down. They've got their faith locked down. And Fuller was, I went to symposiums there where they were exploring human sexuality and they had panels of people from all different perspectives where you have a conservative perspective, you have a very progressive perspective, you have somebody who's kind of in the middle, you have people who are gay, people who are lesbian, people who are in relationships, and you're going, well, this feels very real. This feels like the world that I live in. Yeah. There's all these different people and they're giving perspectives and then you can ask questions and interact. And that felt like a learning space. Yep. Like we're not here to tell you how to believe. We're here to help you learn. Yep. Which you think is the purpose of an education system. It's like, no, we're here to help you learn. But in these evangelical spaces, sometimes they're not really interested. It doesn't seem like,
well,
even though they may be.
We're here to tell you how to think rather than like help you think and ask questions and find answers to those questions.
And that was so dissatisfying for me. Mm-hmm. But I like, again, I don't want to spend my time poo-pooing the evangelicals and like that doesn't do anything good in the world.
Sure.
So all those people are so conservative. And then all of a sudden it brings up like a list inside of you of how to judge them.
Right.
And then you're just doing the same thing. You're just the other side of the coin.
True. Yes.
Of like, no. I look at my background and even being in a conservative school for 4 years, I'm grateful for it. There were some good things that I picked up along the way that I learned that helped me navigate this world that I live in now, but even understanding where maybe a more conservative mindset might live. Yeah. It's like, okay, I want to understand you. I want to understand where you're coming from.
Sure.
I don't want to be dismissive. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to close off the possibility of relationship.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're going through seminary and then you get into beyond seminary and you start entering into full-time ministry, you know, in my 20s and in my 30s, I operated with a sense of rightness. And my goal was to be right.
Yeah.
And to win a conversation. And anytime your goal is to be right or win a conversation, it feels like the conversation's over.
It's
even
not a
before
conversation.
It's not a conversation.
Yeah.
So that feels bad, you know, but I think I lived in that world. And I remember a dear friend of mine who knew me well. She looked at me one day and she says, you always have to be right. And I was like, oh, come on now. And you know it's true. And then you're like, yeah, but I don't know that I want to look at that right now.
Right.
And it has to come from certain people and you have to be ready for it.
Uh-huh.
So was I ready to receive it? Apparently I was, because it hit me at such a place inside of me that I'm going, I think she's right. Mm-hmm. And I don't like it.
Yep.
But it's probably time for me to look at it and pay attention to it. So there was that moment. And then there was another key moment, I think it was in my 30s, where somebody came to me and says, why are you so angry? And I was like, so those like questions that get asked that are deep questions that hit you at your core, like, why do you always feel you need to be right? And why are you so angry? Those felt after I was like the initial shock and sting of it, because it hit me. Yeah. It was like, oh, this is an invitation towards your healing. You could actually do something about these things. Yeah. Because these are actually really good people who are telling you what they see. Yeah. And do you want to pay attention to it? Mm-hmm. And I thought, I think I do, because I want to grow and evolve and I want to be the fullest experience of myself. Yep. And I don't want to be pretend Jon or anything other than like this true, authentic who I amness in the world. Yeah. So those key moments in life come along and you have to pay attention to them. Yeah. And like set aside the anger. Like, what's the anger really about?
Yeah. I mean, that's my question is like, what was it about?
It was really about me.
Okay.
And my own disappointment in myself. Yeah. But I thought it was about conservatives. So I'm going through, after Fuller, I get my first full-time professional ministry position as a youth pastor at Bel Air Presbyterian Church. Okay. So I'm like at the top of the, Bel Air. You're going, what is this? Mm-hmm. President Reagan and his wife Nancy attended Bel Air Presbyterian Church.
Oh boy.
So you're sitting in this congregation. You're like, oh, that's the president of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
Right.
He's there. And that kind of gives you an idea of the clientele of this place. But I was the youth pastor, so I didn't really live in that world.
So it was like Reagan's grandchildren.
Yeah, right. I got to take care of Ronnie's grandkids. Like, hey, man, like, tell me what is it like to have a granddad that's the president of the world? Yeah. Right? So,
insane. Yeah.
But that was such a cool space to be in.
Yeah.
So I can't remember, where was I going with this?
Well, you were talking about anger and
where did it come from?
Yeah.
Like, what was I angry about? So I think going into ministry, here I am a youth pastor. I'm just loving what I'm doing because it's about being with students. And the youth group was a mixture of kids coming from the inner city of LA and then private school kids. Yeah. And they all assembled in Bel Air.
Wow.
At this place. So you have all of these kids coming from really difficult, complex spaces. And then you have these kids coming from this world where money isn't an issue and they have a ton of it. Yep. And they're getting the best education that they possibly can. And then you're dropping them in the same environment together and you're teaching them about how to live in the way of Jesus. Yeah. And it is like, oh, this is good. Yeah. They didn't prepare this for me. They didn't prepare me for this in seminary, but here I am. Yeah. Like in real time with these kids. And I just fell in love with them. I loved working with them, enjoyed that part of ministry. I think I was joyful and happy and light in that space.
Sure.
And then I got into church planting. And that was like my first experience of starting something new and launched a church community in Manhattan Beach, California. Okay. Which is the dream, Jon Caliguire.
I know, yeah.
Someday we're going to get there,
We both have a dream of getting out to California.
We're getting back to California. Yeah. We're letting ourselves know and everybody else know.
Yeah.
If you want to know where Jon and Jon are in the future.
Yeah, we're manifesting ourselves there.
We're manifesting, that's right. San Clemente, here we come. Yeah. So we'll be podcasting there next year.
Yeah, you'll see us. We'll be on the beach probably.
So I go into church planting, and then while I'm in church planting world, doing that and building a new community in Manhattan Beach, I start going through my own, like pulling my faith apart and starting to go, wait a minute, like this is what I've been told my whole life. I'm not even sure that's real anymore. And that's really weird, hard to do when you're the one leading the church. And you're the one up front, you're the talking head up front, and you're giving your interpretation of the Bible to people who are coming in, like, tell us what this means. And you've got people, again, from all different backgrounds coming in. And Manhattan Beach is a laid back vibe. It's a beach community, as you know. It's why you want to live there. It's like, so like, oh my gosh, people would come in, and
great people.
We met on Sunday nights at 4:30.
Okay.
So people would be coming out of the water in the afternoon. And then just walk into
it's the best
church space, right? And they're like, I'm just going to leave my board in the back if that's cool.
Like a board rack for all those people.
There's board racks, so there's sand, there's that feeling of openness and connection. And it's just a really chill vibe. But then in any sort of church space, there's just like a contingency of people that come from different backgrounds. And there's people that want certainty, and there's people who are like, I don't know, I'm fine with mystery. I'm good. So navigating that. So I'm then going through my own process. In about 2004-05, I start pulling everything apart. So we started the church in 2002. 3 years in, I'm pulling everything apart, but I'm doing it in secret because I'm thinking, like, I can't do this in front of everybody. They're not going to be able to come along on this journey with me. It's not even fair. It's not right. And the first one for me to go to pull apart, and this will get to my anger piece in a moment. So I haven't forgotten about your initial question.
Great.
Was around eschatology, which has to do with the end of all things. So eschatology is like, how is the world going to end? And where do we go after we die? There's like all of that. Do you have that solved, by the way? Do you know?
No.
Where are we going after we die?
In my back pocket. I got like a little cheat sheet.
I'd love
this person there.
I'd love to know what you think. We'll come back to you in a moment. But I started pulling that apart. And then I grew up in this belief that there was this thing called a rapture, where Jesus was going to come back and take all of his people that actually believed in him off the earth. And then the earth was going to go through a tribulation period where it was just going to get blitzed with fire. It's a really bad story. And it's actually not in the Bible. But I didn't know that. But
which
it's
is
not
crazy,
even there.
After studying the Bible for years, you're like, it's got to be some chapter I haven't read yet, I'm sure.
It's not there. It's nowhere. And yet so many Americans, I would say most people in the West, believe this story. And it's a crazy story. We don't need to go into that. But I started pulling that apart, and I'm like, that's not even in the Bible. And it was one of those things that was given to me as a child. And when you pick up something as a kid, it's these adult figures are telling you this is what you believe. And you go, okay, so Jesus is going to come back, and you're not going to know when it's going to happen. So there's already an element of like, I'm screwed if he shows up now. There's like an element of like, what if he comes, like maybe this year it just hasn't been my best.
Totally. So, some Santa Claus vibes.
There's a fear. There's like a fear factor there. And I'm like, I don't think this is part of the story. I don't think it's part of the narrative in the Bible. So I was doing that. And then I did the mistake of actually started teaching it before I was really ready to teach it.
Teaching that it wasn't real.
So I'm like, I'm going to teach the book of Revelation, which is supposed to be like this book that talks all about the tribulation and talks about when the earth is just going to get blitzed. People, some are toasted, some are not. And so I started teaching it from a different perspective and teaching it from, it's either all symbolism and symbolic or it's all literal. But it can't be both. And we want to make both live together. But that's not the purpose of this type of literature that we're reading. So again, knowing like, what are we actually reading? What are we actually looking at? This is apocalyptic literature. And apocalyptic literature is not to be taken literally. Or you're going to have some really weird interpretations. So that's where it leads you. So I start doing this, and people are getting really upset. And
in your church?
Oh, yeah. They're like, where are you getting this information? And I'm like, well, I'm reading the actual book called the Bible. I'm like reading this. So I'm starting to get really angry with them. So it's them. They're the problem. It's not me. I'm telling you something really good. This is good news. And you guys are getting mad at me. So this like plants these seeds of anger inside of you. And as that progresses, then you start pulling other things apart. And people are like, what's next? Like, what else are you going to start pulling apart for us? So it's not this, it's this. And you're like coming in and pulling everything apart. And even like the salvation message of after you die, some people go to heaven, some don't. And I'm like, I don't know. So there's like this element of, I don't see that anywhere in the Bible either.
Right.
But that's a story that we've taken from outside, and then we attach it to this ancient book.
Right.
So I start pulling that apart. And then people go, well, then what's Christianity about if it's not that?
Yeah. I thought that was the whole point. That's
right.
why I had my whole emotional moment and said the words that I was supposed to say. And
I'm pulling it all apart.
Yeah.
Back to my Maverick father.
Yeah.
Right. Maverick dad pulled everything apart. I'm like, that's what you do. You pull things apart. And he's got this mystic side to him. And my mom works for a Jewish rabbi. Jesus was Jewish. That's probably a good thing. So that like leads you. And then I have friends that you're not supposed to be friends with because they're dangerous. So these friends who are writing and influencing Christian culture are writing things that are dangerous. And I'm like, yeah, that's a friend of mine. I love what he's saying in the world. And I like what he's putting out there. And like, you're friends with this really dangerous heretic? I'm like, yeah. And I think he's great. And I think what he's saying is great.
Yeah.
Then they want to lump you in with heresy. So I'm starting to feel super rejected, misunderstood.
Yeah.
And it's really hurting me.
Yeah.
And I'm super angry with them, but also with myself. And then I'm realizing, wait, I go back into my childhood and I felt misunderstood. I felt rejected. There were things along the way that I hadn't dealt with because I didn't know how.
Yeah.
And all of this is like bringing this up inside of me. Like people don't understand me. And so I'm getting really angry. That's my response to these hurt feelings.
Totally.
Is I'm making them the problem when it's really inside of Jon. Like Jon has to look at himself and go, so what do you hurt about?
Yeah.
So like, that's why the question, why are you so angry? Why do you always need to be right? Hit me at my core. Because then now you're getting into that space of you may want to look at that and you may want to experience some healing.
Yeah.
And so once I was able to identify that, I would love to go back to my community in LA and apologize. To say to them, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know. I was doing the best I could. But I would love to say that I'm so sorry. I was coming from a place of anger.
Yeah.
And that's not fair to you. And I apologize. And I own that. And I've since then integrated that into my life and go, well, that was a piece of my story.
Yep.
Doesn't mean I was bad. It just means I was unaware. And now I'm dealing with my inner anger and looking at it. And I know when it rises up, I can recognize it and wonder like, well, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
Did somebody hurt you? Did it hit a trigger inside of you, or maybe even a scar? So that's like, I think that's it in a nutshell, Jon. That's a lot. I feel like I've been talking for a while.
No, it's all good. Honestly, one of the first things that comes to mind with your whole story of realizing that it's like an anger that's actually something about you feeling like unaccepted or feeling like you're not welcome. It reminds me of the movie Jojo Rabbit, where all the Nazis are painted to be like these kids running around and they're doing these atrocious things and being horrible like the Nazis were. And yet there's this cool, like compassionate angle that's taken with this movie, to almost see it as the children underneath everything going on. And I think I look at your story and it's like, without that recognition of what's really going on with the anger, you in your head, you're dealing with all of these like adult theology, complex problems that feel so heavy and feel so like complex. But underneath what you're saying is like, there was this kid that just felt hurt, that just felt unseen and left out and was afraid that all the other kids were going to just abandon him. And I just think it's powerful, like with a lot of the stuff in how the world is with church, where there's a lot of anger, a lot of people leaving church, a lot of people feeling abandoned by the people leaving church and vice versa. To me, it's been a really helpful perspective to look back and be like, we feel like we're so complex and adult and mature in all the things that are going on. But like, there's just a lot of like people that are scared, and there's a lot of like little children underneath that. If you can just see that, like, we're all just like these kids underneath that really just want love, acceptance, intimacy, and to be held. And people are starting to find that in different places. And there's this big alienation happening in the world where a lot of people who kind of had these meaning making sort of formative years of Christianity and of growing up together. So yeah, I'm just seeing a lot of people that grew up in these like formative meaning making years in different versions of Christianity, whether that was more liberal or more conservative or evangelical or charismatic, like whatever corner they come from. There's these people that are still like really solid in those beliefs and mindsets that are watching people deconstruct them and take those ideas apart. And there's a lot of like kind of older brother complex that I'm seeing unfold of like, the surface level emotion is judgment and is these people are kind of, they're going way where they're going to ruin their lives. Like they don't understand what they're doing. You know, they've stopped running the race. They've stopped, I thought we were in it together. But underneath that, I think for a lot of them, there's this deeper emotion of like, I thought you were at the same party I was. And now you want to go to a different party and you're not including me in that journey. And I just feel like kind of abandoned. I feel sad. I feel lonely. I feel not chosen. And again, but like we paint all these like very like grandiose things of like, it's deconstruction or it's, you were hurt by the church or whatever. And there's, I don't know, we just add so many layers on top of it. But I do think underneath a lot of Christians genuinely are going through like a real trauma of like feeling like their friends that they were in it with, that were really the real ones, are now interested in something else. And now they feel like left behind in a way. So anyway, your story really like reminds me of that because I think on both sides, like I think that inner child like needs to be recognized, that although it does feel like there's these angry, controversial conversations that revolve around theology and how churches operate and what the church is in general, that kind of is like a surface thing. I think underneath, like, there's a lot of just hurt children. Like, I think that like having a Jojo Rabit perspective about it is really helpful to me because I think it gives me a lot more like clarity on like, what are when I'm engaging with someone who either is like completely uninterested in Christianity anymore or is, deeper in those beliefs than they were even before and are wondering why a lot of the people that they thought were really in it with them are gone.
And then what do they say about those people?
Well,
who
a lot
have
of
decided to say, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing I experience primarily is a form of judgment. It's a form of, kind of it's a disappointment. And I think that's a very real thing. And I think a lot of the people that have walked away from Christianity feel that there's a heavy disappointment. Again, I think the prodigal son story is really helpful with this. It's like, I'm sure like that older brother probably had, spent decades with this younger brother building a friendship. And when the younger brother decides that there's a better life out there, there's disappointment. And when the son returns, that disappointment can't be like overturned. That disappointment stays. So yeah, I think that is I think that's a main emotion. And I think some of it is necessary. Like I think, yeah, it's hard to have a friend that you you had thinking the same way as you think something different. Yeah. But I also think a lot of it is kind of unwarranted and does come from a bit of a like, we were the ones doing it right. We were the part of the church that was the real radical Jesus followers that were, had the beliefs, that we're going to change the world. And we set out on this mission to run this race. And now I thought I had all these companions running it with me. And now I look to my right and my left and I feel alone. That's a really real emotion that I think a lot of Christians are experiencing. But I think to me, what I see as the problem is that turns into it goes from disappointment into judgment, into like kind of condemnation, into seeing other people who think different ways now as failures, as people that were not strong enough to run the race. Right. Like that terminology is like very common, and rightly so. It's part of the Bible, but I think when it's part of the context of deep friendships that have lasted for a long time, those words and those ideas can be really hurtful to the person who is just trying to find healthier ways to live and think,
And that you haven't checked your brain at the door.
Yeah.
You're still thinking. I think I've heard that narrative too. Like, oh, these young people are so influenced by culture.
Yeah.
And they're getting yanked away from what's true.
Totally.
And real. And they don't want to think about it anymore. They don't want to look at the truth.
Right.
So that word truth gets used almost like a weapon. It
Correct.
feels like it's been weaponized. Like, you don't
Right.
believe in the truth. I'm like, what are we talking about exactly? But I think that disappointment piece is really insightful for me, even in myself, and thinking about as I work in church spaces and dealing with people of all different ages, and then you start interacting with people who are a little bit older, and there is an element of sadness in them of like, why aren't we invited to the party anymore?
Right.
Because we were once like the party, and now you guys have this thing you're doing, you're calling it deconstruction or whatever terminology. We're trying to explain an experience that we're having. It's not like I'm deconstructing my faith. It's I'm having an experience that is causing a lot of discomfort in me.
Right.
And I think there is an element of people who are walking away and they have their reasons, but they're also feeling really like a lot of discomfort, and their inner child is going, I just want to be a part of something. Like I've even heard that in you, where you and I were talking one day about faith and church, and you're like, I still want to get together with people, and I still want to like do the things that you do in that building. I just don't want to do it in there because it doesn't feel like the thing that I'm looking for.
Right.
And I get it, because it's 3 songs up top. It's an announcement, and then it's a sermon for 30 minutes, and then it's a song to close that tugs at your emotions, and then there's a closing, and then there's like a party afterwards, and then we want to get you all into small groups. It's like we have this thing, we have this obsession. We have to get everybody in these small groups to build these little community spaces for people. And I understand
our sales pipeline.
Yeah, our sales pipeline. Like, how can we get you moved through the system?
Yeah.
And people are like, I don't know if that's working for me anymore.
Right.
And I get it. But then people who are like, it's still working for them are like, why are you leaving us?
Right.
And that feels like disappointment and sadness.
Yeah.
And instead of it becoming deeper compassion and empathy and understanding and listening to people going, tell me, like, what is it that you feel this is missing now? And that's where like I know my heart wants to get to, of like, tell me more about your experience. Tell me more about why you feel like this just isn't working for you anymore.
Right.
And I would be curious, John, like as you think about people who are not finding deep, significant meaning any longer in church space, what's some of the stuff that's at the core of it from your perspective?
I think it's complicated.
Yeah, it's all of that.
It's complicated. I think the general narrative that I kind of want to push against a little bit is most people who are still in the church and watching this thing unfold. The narrative, I think, in a lot of their heads is like, yeah, like, you know, someone at church treated you poorly, or you had some negative experience with a pastor or with someone on staff, and that's real. And like you had some hurt, and so you left because you were hurt because something went wrong. And, you know, you have this trauma, which I'll affirm that you have trauma, like something went wrong, you're hurt, you're walking away because that relationship or that experience you had somehow was extrapolated to like the rest of what you believed. I think that's what like a lot of Christians are sort of thinking is what's happening. But to me, I honestly think that a lot of people, especially like with COVID as like a trigger and a catalyst, they had an opportunity to sort of set down their rhythms of what they did that kept them thinking the way that they were, and be able to look kind of from a top down and ask the big questions like, why do I really do this? Why do I think any of this? Why does any of this actually work for me? And I honestly think that a lot of people that have walked away from Christianity have walked away because of theological things that they just couldn't reconcile with like their hearts and what felt right and good to them, whether that be relating to like affirming, non-affirming theology, LGBTQ stuff, whether that is salvation and what that means, the heaven and hell eschatology conversation, whether that's about like who has access to God, who is the closest to God. Like there's a lot of these theologies that like I personally have also like really shifted over the last few years, because I had that really cool opportunity to be like, maybe there's some other authors I could like read, and maybe there's some other corners of like the spiritual like realm of thinkers that I could like pay attention to other than like the evangelical stuff that I've been like consuming very consistently for a long time. Which is, I think, a really good thing. Like I've always kind of thought with Christianity, like when you're looking for truth, when you're searching to know the answer to a hard question, it seems like a silly thing to like only go to one place to find what that answer might be. And I think like that was like a lot of people before COVID was like, well, this question's hard, so I'm going to go think what all the other evangelical Christians think about like this question so that I can find the answer, rather than asking it more openly and being like, anywhere I look for truth or wisdom, if I find it there, I need to like accept that it might be there.
That's right.
So I think COVID kind of gave people that opportunity to like sort of experiment, to look other places. And to me, like, honestly, a lot of the people that I'm like really close with that aren't interested in Christianity anymore, it's like, I would probably say, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in as well.
Right.
Because I think there were a lot of pieces of my theology that were reframed that started to feel a lot better than sort of the classic salvation narrative of like penal substitutionary atonement, which like most people don't know what that is, but it's also like the foundation of like what they believe. And I was exposed to a couple other ways of thinking about it. And all of a sudden it was like, I had in my head the question, like, does this make God better or worse? Mm-hmm. And for pretty much all of the new ways I was finding to think about it, I was like, this is like dream God. This is like the bet, like,
and maybe that's the point.
I know. I mean, there's a quote somewhere that's like, I don't think we're going to get to heaven and find that, like, you know, meet God and be like, oh, I thought you'd be better.
Yeah.
I thought there would be more beautiful. I thought you'd be more beautiful and make more sense.
Is there another place I can go? I don't think I want to be here.
I know. And so, yeah, like I was finding ways that not only were like, okay, this makes God better, but also seemed weirdly even more rooted in scripture than the things I was already thinking about God. Mm-hmm. And also like discovering that like with Catholicism, with Orthodox Christianity, with like the 2,000 years of history that have led up to here, there have been a ton of different ways to think about these things. And I didn't really know any of them or take any of them seriously, because in the faith I was raised, and most of my background, we are pretty much only interested in anything since Martin Luther, basically.
Yeah.
So
500 years ago.
Exactly.
It's not too long.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's really not. And even like, yeah.
I heard you use the phrase leaving Christianity, and I don't know if that's true. My experience of you is that that's not true.
No, it's not true for me.
I understand people we're trying to give language to an experience we're having.
Right.
So I've heard people say, I left Christianity, and I'm thinking, yeah, but you still strike me as somebody who is into the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
Your understanding of God, and maybe not better, but more beautiful.
Right.
There's more expansive. It feels like, oh, there's actually space to breathe.
Yeah.
Where some versions of Christianity and some versions of a experience with God feels very restrictive, feels very tight. And I think people, when they come into these spaces, they have to shrink to come in.
Right.
You have to become a smaller version of yourself.
Yeah.
And if that's the point, then I understand why people are like, am I into this anymore? Am I interested in shrinking? I have to shrink in so many spaces just to operate, like at my job. And I would think that a beautiful God, a beautiful faith, an expansive faith that's full of mystery and unknowing. I don't know what's going to happen after I die. Like, is that okay? Is that okay for me to think that? Is it okay for me to think that maybe hell isn't the hell that we've been taught, and that maybe there's even a more beautiful expression of what that is, and that maybe hell isn't a forever thing? And my perspective of what I see happening with people is they're not leaving Christianity, they're just leaving this lame version of it. It's like, it's almost become a caricature of God, or a mimic.
Yeah.
And nobody's interested in a mimic. And I think COVID did pull the rug off of everything and exposed the church, which was like, it's about damn time they're getting exposed. It's like, oh, there's like a little tiny person behind the curtain that's been running the thing for so long. And we're not into it anymore. And politics didn't help. But again, what happened in the political environment, it like revealed things. Like everything got uprooted. Yeah. And we started to see what was really going on. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested in that anymore. And I'm definitely not going to give up a piece of my life on a Sunday to go have an experience that's not really doing it for me.
Right.
So it's just not hitting where people are at. So I think there's some of that too that I'm watching, and I see it in my own kids, and I see it in myself, and I'm part of it. That's the part that's really weird, is I'm part of this thing that I call a machine.
Right.
and I think it's become like a machine. You just put gas in it, turn it on, and it's the 3-song, like I said, 3 songs, announcement, sermon, song, close.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, don't forget to put your money in the plate on the way out, because we got to keep the lights on.
Totally.
So I get all that. And the machine operates in a certain way. And yet you're like, Jesus wasn't a machine. He's not even a mechanism for getting us somewhere else.
Right.
And it's like Jesus has become a mechanism by which we then get to the next thing, as opposed to experiencing this beautiful individual that transformed the world, that's still transforming lives. We're still talking about him.
Yeah.
Thousands of years later, we're still compelled by this Jesus character. And we're going, why is he so compelling? What is it about him that's so compelling? And then you dig into his story and you go, I'm in for that. Yeah. And if that's what Christianity is, or whatever we call it, then I'm all in for it. That's why the mystical space, the contemplative space, the quiet space of like, yeah, I'm not going to just take theology in there and figure it out.
Yeah.
And that God, in that space, God isn't an argument.
Right.
Like I can't turn God into an argument, because once I do that, then it's like, well, what's the point of this?
Yeah.
Someone has to win the argument.
Yeah.
And then someone loses. And then again, I'm like, oh, well, that's rooted in disappointment. And 2 kids are arguing at a table, and you're like, you guys are grown adults.
Yeah.
You're like in your 50s having these arguments that none of us are interested in.
Yeah.
We're just not interested in anymore. We actually want to be with people out in the wilderness, outside, expanding and growing.
Right.
And that's what I keep hearing. And I'm like, oh, then what is this thing? And I'm in this thing, and it's so weird to be in this thing. Although my next move, my sense is like God is calling me into something else, and I don't know what that is.
Sure.
And it's terrifying, because my whole life has been in this thing.
Right.
It's a box. I lived in a box.
Like genuinely your whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since I was born.
Yeah.
And then I watched how people operate in the box. And then you go into these boxes, and every box functions a certain way, but they're kind of the same element. And then I'm sensing that there's something outside of the box that I'm being called into because of all my experience with the box. And it's not a bad thing. I'm like, just thankful for everything that I've experienced inside of it. But it's now time to get out of the box and expand into new spaces. And so I'm attempting to it like clumsily, but I also feel like I need to somersault into this.
Yeah.
Like getting back to that inner child piece. Children, like when you watch kids who are learning to walk, one of the first things they do is they somersault. They don't necessarily just get up and start walking.
Yeah.
They'll like scoot on their tuchus. They'll like, do this with their arms.
Yeah.
But they learn how to somersault. And I'm like, why do kids somersault? Like, you don't teach kids like, you know what you need to do? You need to do a somersault. They just somersault because they're learning like, I'm in control of this thing called a body.
Yeah.
They somersault. And then after they do it, they look at you like, that was amazing. Did you see what I just did? And I want to get back to my somersault self.
Yeah.
And get into somersaulting into this next thing. Because the world is shifting. The reality is we're all shifting. We're all evolving. Church spaces that don't want to come along are going to be done.
Yeah.
Eventually. They're on their way out. So the church has to be like, we gotta make this shift to whatever it is. And they don't know what it is. And it's scaring the crud out of them.
Yeah.
And we're so used to knowing what it is, and now we don't know what it is. But if we actually turn the machine on that was maybe functional 30 years ago, it'll still go. And it still works. That's the problem for some people.
Right.
But then there's people like yourself and others who are going, it's just not working for me anymore.
Right.
And it doesn't matter how cute and sexy you are. And like, if you have the best band in town and the most prolific teacher and whatever you people are doing, like your burger trucks, you come in, it's just not going to work for people.
Right.
Because they're like, I'm not looking for that.
Yeah.
So
which
from
is
your
so
perspective,
interesting to me that like, this is a shift I've experienced with a lot of my friends and my family, and it's been very personal to me. But also I'm just looking at like a macro scale and looking at numbers and graphs and I'm like, oh, there's something really big happening here. Uh-huh. And I think the church at its worst is like feeling scared, backed into a corner, and is trying to employ more guilt, more, be weary, like you're the wayward generation. And there's this kind of like fear mongering of like, you better be careful if you leave this machine behind.
Yeah. Leave the machine.
Right.
Leave it.
But then I don't know. I kind of more just have this feeling of like, I think God does a very necessary destructing and reconstructing of the church every couple hundred years. There's like really rich church history that's like that exact story of like people doing it for a long way. Eventually people are like, oh, this is really messed up. And then it like totally gets demolished, and then something really new and beautiful sometimes happens.
That sounds really exciting.
Exactly. Yeah. And even like the Reformation to me is like an example of that, but it's like now the Reformation needs to be reformed.
Right. We got to keep reforming.
And yeah, I think something really new, I hope something really new comes out of it. Because I do think people, like you said, are looking for something, and I don't think this machine works anymore.
I think I would even take it beyond hope and say, I know something new is coming.
Yeah.
There's certain things that you know.
Yeah.
And I think there's inside of all of us, there's a piece of inner wisdom that was given to you when you were brought into the world.
Yeah.
It was like it was downloaded into your computer system.
Yeah.
Inner wisdom, inner truth, authentic self. And all of us know that it's there.
Yeah.
And what happens is it gets graffitied as we walk into life.
Right.
You get traumatized. You start to feel like, oh, disappointment, or your parents don't give you the time and the attention that you need. And then you interpret that as, I'm not worthy of love. And you're like, no, that's not true. But you pick that up and then you give meaning to that.
Right.
Because your parents can't give you all their time and attention, or they can't function as human beings.
Right.
But a kid doesn't know that.
Yeah.
So then I'm like, well, I got to be really good at something in order to make this happen. I got to be good at sports or school so that I get the love that I need. But we buy into that narrative that I'm not worthy, that I'm unloved. There's something wrong with me.
Right.
But your inner wisdom never lies. It always knows what's right. And if you can get back to that, which I think that's the goal, is to get back to that inner wisdom, that inner song that lives in everybody.
Yeah.
And tune into it. Listen to it. It never will lead you in the wrong direction. It's a gift from the divine. It's like you get to have this inner wisdom that's actually going to help you get to where you need to go.
Yep.
And you need to trust it. But the thing with the inner wisdom is it's not predictable, and you can't control it. And that drives us crazy.
Yeah.
Because I need things to be predictable, and I need to control them in order to feel like I have some sense of knowing.
Yeah.
And then I know that I'm loved. I know that I'm accepted because of this. Versus I'm loved purely because I exist, or I'm enough because I exist.
Yeah.
And that inner wisdom, it keeps telling me that whatever is coming is so good and so expansive. And it's people like you that give me the most hope, because I see the hunger in your eyes and the refusal to go, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to bow to the machine, because I literally don't worship a machine.
Right.
I'm not even interested in giving my life to a machine. I'm interested in giving my life to beauty, and to connection, and to a relationship, because I'm a human being who needs something real. And so your generation, I have such great encouragement and hope of whatever's coming. I simply want to be a part of it. I just want to be like, can I just be a part of what you people are doing? Because it's so good. So I think for me, someone who's going to be 55 in a couple of weeks and has been in this machine thing for so long, that I'm going, it's not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
And they know it, and I know it.
Yeah.
And I know it's coming. So I don't hope anymore. I know. And I'm like, this is going to be really kind of like, I know that we're going to live in San Clemente someday. We're coming.
The deepest.
We're coming, San Clemente. Come on.
Yeah.
Encinitas, let's go. But it's this sense of like, I just know it. And whatever role we all play in it, there's enough room for everybody. That's the beauty of it. There's enough for everybody to participate in it.
Yeah.
It's going to transform the world back into a beautiful space. We're going to get out of these shenanigans that we're in. It's like, what are we doing? It's so bizarre.
Totally.
But I think the machine, like you said, it's like white knuckling right now.
Yeah.
It's getting really loud, and they're using fear mongering, because fear is how you control people.
Yes.
That's how you control groups of people. Like, if you keep doing this, John Caliguire, you're probably going to fall apart. And you're like, isn't that the point though? And am I not supposed to fall apart? It's like that expression, John Caliguire, he's in the deep end. And we say it like it's a bad thing. Like, are you supposed to stay in the shallow end your whole life? Or are you supposed to eventually go to the deep end? Isn't that the point?
Yeah.
Like, John, you can't be in the shallow end your whole life. You have to venture into the deep end of the pool because that's where you can't touch the bottom, but you can dive into it. You can do flips. You can move. It's much bigger.
Yeah.
So you're not always touching the bottom of the pool. And that's the goal. It's like getting to the deep end of the pool and be like, I don't know. I float and sometimes I swim down and I touch the bottom just to make sure it's still there.
It still exists.
But at the same time, there is this curiosity that I see in people that are leaving this thing. They're leaving the machine is what they're doing.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're not built to worship a machine.
Right.
It's not part of who we are. We're built to give worth, significance, our time and attention to something that's beautiful and good.
Right.
And you can call that God. You can call that Jesus. I'm all in for all of it.
Yeah.
Like you said, if it's true, I want it.
Right.
Wherever it comes from.
Yes.
If it's from my Christian tradition, great. But if it's from this novel or this person over here is part of a different faith group, and they say something, you're like, where did you get that? Well, it's actually part of my Buddhist tradition. You're like, oh my God, that's beautiful. Tell me more.
Yeah.
And
there's no fear in that.
There's no fear. It's just wonder and curiosity. And like, can God hold it all somehow? I think so. I think she can.
I think she just might be able to do that.
She might be able to hold it. And then I just lost my job. Whatever. But it's so like sorry, this expansive, curious openness is what I think people are more drawn to.
Absolutely.
And there's still a bottom to the pool. It's not like you swim down, there's nothing there. There's still a bottom. Eventually you're going to hit bedrock if you're dealing with something that's real.
Yes.
You're not just going to keep swimming down and be like, where's the bottom? You got to go deeper. I'm like, is there anything else? And then eventually you hit it. So when people are like, I think I'm going to leave this. I'm like, good, leave it. Go explore. And then eventually you might bump into something that's real.
Right.
Maybe that's the invitation.
Yeah. I think something I've noticed with a lot of the people that have left is they're super open to receiving truth from anywhere. But the hardest place for them to receive truth now is from maybe the tradition that they came from. Oh. And I think even in some ways I resonate with that.
Yeah.
Where sometimes, when you've deconstructed, it's very like that kind of can feed a little bit of an ego thing too. Our brain loves to think I know something that no one else does.
That's right.
I'm thinking about things right. And the deep irony is that's where we've come from. In, evangelical, the word is means we need to go evangelize. We have the right ideas. We need to go tell everyone the right ideas to fix them. Which is a really sad way of saying it, but in its worst state, that's what evangelism looks like. But that's, that feeds the ego in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people who have kind of left, I think the biggest ego killing thing, including for me, would be to admit, maybe there were some parts of that actually were life. I think because that mindset of I know what's right, I'm doing it how it I'm part of the elite people that are doing it correctly. I think that can really also easily translate to a post-Christian life of I have the right theology or no theology at all, which is the right way to be. And there remains this same sort of attitude you had as an evangelical, maybe of I need to go tell the world how to be because I've got the corner on the market here. And so, I just feel to me, there's this beautiful, invitation for both parties to lay down that ego and to say maybe there could be truth in the last place that I want to admit maybe that there is. There's the flip side of the coin always. And there's always, if you flip the perspective, I think in a lot of ways, the same fears and wounding can drive both the person that wants nothing to do with church anymore and the person who thinks that they're doing it right and is, the Christian of all Christians, So I feel for me personally, I find myself in a space where I, in a lot of ways, resonate more with the people that won't call themselves Christians anymore.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, most people that say they won't call themselves Christians anymore, usually the reason behind that is because they'll tell me when people hear the word Christian, everything that they think about is not how I am and not what I think. And like a lot of them will usually be like, Jesus, still like a really important person to me, and God, like still a relationship in my life. And even sometimes like scripture, still something valuable to me to meditate
even
over.
That.
And like gathering with other people, still a value for me.
Yeah.
But I just can't ever use the word Christian again because that word has been so tainted at this point that I just can't go back to it. And maybe I'll find a new word, and maybe I don't have to call it anything. Maybe I'll just call it living my life.
Yeah.
And I personally, not all the time, but I generally find more common ground and more ability to like integrate and do relationship with those people than the people that are more where kind of how I felt 5 to 10 years ago of like, you know, having this very like rigid framework of how theology works, having a very like linear and literal way of interpreting everything in the Bible, all that kind of stuff. But yet like I still feel deeply in love with Christianity and church people and people like you that like are on staff with churches. Like I'm never like church being in a building on a Sunday with a bunch of people with the stand up, sit down, you know, call to whatever at the end of the sermon. That doesn't really do it for me. It doesn't feel super relevant to me, at least right now. But the people, it's like, I still feel like I grow and learn so much from the people that, you know, on my worst day, I might feel like I'm better than because I have an evolved theology from them. And I think, it's the real challenge, I think, for all of us, but for me especially, is like I need to just stop being the talker for a while and be the listener to all parties for a while, you know?
And stop this kind of like this mentality of like, how do we get people into the building?
Right.
There's still that drive.
Yeah.
Because there is an element of like, how do we get more people here to hear the thing that we're talking about?
Right.
And what I think we're missing is actually the thing we're talking about, they don't find interesting anymore.
Right.
They're not actually having those conversations that you're having.
Yeah.
And we're assuming that no, but they need to have these conversations. Like, no. But if you move out into relationship with people who think differently than you, or the dangerous people who are like, they're reading these authors, I think you then can expand and listen and tune into, oh, this is actually how people feel and what they're doing. That's why this digital world is so intriguing to me, especially somebody who didn't grow up in the digital world, to start thinking like there are other ways to communicate the goodness of God in other venues that you're actually reaching more people and still impacting people. Yeah. But you're inviting them into something different. You're not inviting them into a building. You're inviting them into expansive thinking and creativity and connection. And you're actually having it through the digital world. That's the reality we're in. So this whole thing, and like the possibility of people listening with your myriad of listeners and subscribers. Of, oh, well, maybe this is helping people put language to an experience they're having. And I think that's what I'm hearing you talk about. Like, I want to give people language and help them be able to say, oh, is that what that is? Could that possibly be God? Maybe, but we should probably step into that more and explore it. So if we don't come in with this posture of, I'm just here to listen to your heart and listen to your life. I'm just living my life. Right. I'm not out to get you to come to my thing. I'm just living my life. And if you happen to come to the thing, great. If it serves you well. If that's what you need, I'm fine with it. But if you're like in relationship with me and you're going, hey, you're a pastor on a staff of a church, do you want me to come to your thing and be a part of your little groups that you like to put people into? Like, not necessarily. If that's good for you, if that feels like that is actually helping you grow in your life and evolve, then like this place I work, people like coming here, and it's a pretty free place. Like this church is pretty cool, and there's good people here, and there's people here that don't believe the way that some of us believe, and that's okay. Like that's not the goal, is to get everybody to believe the same and think the same so that we all feel safe and secure. Right. It's more of like, we're trying to do life together, and we're trying to live in this intentional way where we're experiencing community. It just happens to be in this building. And So I'm with you. I don't want to poo-poo it all and just say, the church, it's weak, but it certainly needs some help. It's certainly limping. I'll say that. And probably coming to a close.
Yeah.
In the next 20 years.
Yeah.
I can see it eventually just going, this is not going to cut it anymore.
Right.
And then we find ourselves truly in a post-Christian environment where we're like on the other side of this. I had hoped COVID would do that. And then post-COVID, our propensity to go back to the thing was so powerful that as soon as the doors were open and we could take our masks off, then it was like, put some gas in the machine, crank it up, and let's go again.
Yeah.
And then we did it because that's what we know.
Yeah.
And instead of going, I wonder if we should just not even consider turning the machine on.
Yeah.
And see if there's another way to do life together.
Yes.
And that's what I'm hearing you say. Like, we just discovered there's another way to do life.
Yeah.
And I ain't doing it on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock.
Totally.
I'm out.
I've actually really discovered that one of the challenges I think that's going to face like people creating some more of these like inclusive, expansive communities is sometimes like the most narrow-minded types of thinking create the strongest communities, which is like a strange backwards thing.
So weird. Yeah.
But like, I think that's why cults are so powerful. And why like extremist religious groups are so powerful, because when like the qualifier for like being a part of a group is like, you having to assent to X number of theological ideas or political ideas or whatever, there creates this like camaraderie, I think, that is very difficult to achieve in like a very open, inclusive, anyone belongs type community.
Yeah.
And I see that in like, I listened through the whole Mark Driscoll Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. And I think it's weirdly that church is similar to the church that I grew up in Illinois. But one of the reasons I think churches like that grow so large is because they try to appeal to such a narrow niche and audience of people that this principle of like the most personal is the most universal, I think explodes it. And so like when you're really deeply appealing to like the masculine kind of guy that really needs to take responsibility and really just wants to like prove himself and like be a man, like that really was the audience that like Mark Driscoll
threw up in my mouth.
Yeah, I know. Well, that really is like the audience that Mark Driscoll like appealed to. And yet it grew like this huge audience. Like it amassed like huge numbers of people, because once you were like it was this very specific culture you were a part of. It was a very specific way of thinking. It was a very specific type of Christianity. And it was like so niched down, this very specific type of person, not only that it's appealing to, but it's trying to create. There creates this like very deep camaraderie of people that feel like nobody else understands me except for the people in this group. And so they're my ride or dies. Like anyone that's a part of this group, I get them, they know me. And the hard thing is like, what makes like cults so difficult to leave is like, there's a genuine intimacy that comes from everybody thinking and behaving the very same way and having to deal with the impacts of that in their lives. And I think a challenge that faces any group of people that's trying to appeal to anyone is it's kind of that idea, like you appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. And so this has just kind of like been an idea that I've just been thinking of like somehow the most toxic ways of thinking and types of leadership and ways of gathering people are the most successful from a numbers perspective,
Yeah.
And that just kind of blows my mind and just feels like I think a problem to solve or something to think about for like people that are looking to rethink what church might mean. Because in the past, it's been like the more narrow we can like paint what type of person we're trying to create here, the more capacity we have to grow and feel like we belong, because we kind of have this safety net of everyone thinks the same way, everyone, or at least maybe if not everyone thinks the same way, there is like one way of thinking that we're eventually trying to get everyone to get to.
Yeah.
We have our pastor set as the ideal, and everyone's like trying as hard as they can to become like that pastor. And yeah, those are weirdly powerful ways of organizing church or thinking about gathering people, and yet they do prove to be self-destructive because they don't create like safe spaces to be unsafe, to have ideas that are not necessarily like one is the one that the group thinks. It's just like, I've actually been talking to one of my friends who goes to a church in South Denver, and he's been talking about some of the interesting places they've been running into where it's like a church that's trying to be welcoming to anyone, including on their leadership team. But what happens when you have someone who comes onto your leadership team that like thinks differently, in a good way, because we want diverse thinking, but thinks differently in a way that maybe not everyone else wants to be thinking and organizing and doing things, like it becomes a very difficult thing. So anyway,
so the idea of being super open can lead to like massive sections of complexity. And you're going, oh, now maybe we're just creating the same thing because we need to have like a commonality of why we're coming together and why we're gathering.
Yeah.
And then it starts to get small and niche.
Yes.
Right?
Like it just seems
you start
to be,
niching it.
Yes. It just seems to be built into like
that's interesting.
How people gather and what causes people to gather and what causes certain communities to grow faster than others. And I've just seen like this church that this guy goes to, it's tiny. It's like a couple dozen. I love it. I think it's amazing. They are outside of the box thinkers. They're very open. They have beautiful ways of thinking about God, but also like they're not going to drill down on one specific way. And because of that, like maybe no one's interested,
That's fascinating.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. But it's probably not going to grow.
Yeah.
That's
maybe
that's the
issue.
And maybe it's supposed to be, right? Jesus seemed to be like pulling numbers apart all the time.
Yeah.
And he seemed to like dismantle everything. Anytime people were like, we probably should crank up a band. Could you imagine the disciples going, we should get a band and get some ushers and pass plates?
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, nah, let's pull that apart. Because of that, like understanding how humanity works.
Yeah.
I just find this fascinating. It's like, yeah, that's what we do as people. Groups form. We group ourselves around an idea.
Yeah.
We get niche-like, and then it grows. We get excited because it feeds our egos, and like that ego gets in the way. Then money gets involved, which complicates it and makes it really weird. And then we've got these power structures, and now we have a group that all thinks the same way.
Yes,
like that mind thing.
I think even the most like well-meaning church that starts as a couple people in a living room have these beautiful, amazing, inclusive ideas, and then there's like this death that happens as you grow. Where you just can't.
It's a hopeless podcast.
You
ladies
can't.
And gentlemen.
Yeah, I know. It really lives.
It's not going to work.
I know. It's very interesting, and I almost think that maybe it's part of like how God built us. How God, even what the gospel is, this radical idea that like Jesus came and then was the victim of humanity. He came, and rather than being this powerful radical thing that like overthrew the Roman Empire, his radicality was letting people kill him. It's almost like that's chaos. That's like not in control. That's not, to a lot of people, not beautiful. And yet maybe like that is like a design element that was intentional with the church, of like, we don't exist to preserve ourselves and to perpetuate this thing, The
self-preservation piece is huge, but that is such a human need to self-preserve. It's how we survive. It's how we've made it this far.
Yeah.
So the need to self-protect, self-preserve. I have to be around people. Like we talk about, I want to be around people with all these different ideas, but really do I want this? Do I really want this? Because these ideas are wackadoodle and these ideas are okay. But I think my version of having open ideas maybe go out this far, and then other people's go out this far, and you're like, you can't be part of my group.
Yeah.
I need you. So if we're honest with ourselves and we're really looking at ourselves, like how much of it is ego driven, how much of it is authentic, and then it gets complicated.
Yes.
So do we just not gather anymore? Is that what I'm hearing, John? Don't gather.
I don't know what the solution is. These are
so
just
weird.
Where I'm like, what happens is I create this utopian, like, if only the church could be like this.
Oh,
like,
totally.
I create this utopian version of it, and then I like kind of play it down like a few levels in my head, and I'm like, oh crap, we just run into the same stuff.
We just did the same thing.
Like no wonder we keep replicating the same crap over and over again. It's like, oh dang, I can see why this keeps happening. I can see why it's repetitive, because these very well-meaning people that mean to create safe, good things do that and then somehow back themselves into a corner over and over again. And
maybe it's because we need to keep reinventing ourselves.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the invitation, is like you get into a group, you're well-intentioned, you're like, this is beautiful. Like what we're experiencing is beautiful, but maybe it actually has a shelf life.
Yeah.
And then it's supposed to end.
Right. Because
and then we should
that
celebrate
white knuckling we were talking about
earlier.
like
don't white knuckle, let's stay. How long can we keep walking this tightrope?
right?
Before we eventually fall, or we grab on and we're like, everybody's going to grab on or we're going to fall. And that fear element ends into it. But what if fear, like we keep fear at bay, and we keep curiosity as the driver and connection, because we got to connect. And we're like, so what are we doing? And we're constantly reinventing ourselves. So the goal can't be, this thing's going to get huge.
Right.
Because then it's limited.
Yeah.
The moment we say this thing's going to get huge, you're like, yeah, but then you have to put it in a box.
Yes.
Because you have to contain it. So you can't let it get in a box, because then it becomes something else.
Right.
And they're not bad. They're like, okay, you got in a box, and now you probably need to get out of the box and reinvent yourself. That's what I'm hearing in this conversation of, like, maybe it's not as hopeless as we thought, ladies and gentlemen, but it's like an invitation into reinventing ourselves, because we're doing that as human beings. I'm like, we're constantly trying to reinvent who we are and trying to figure that out. Yeah. Like I said about getting back to our inner wisdom. Yeah. The inner wisdom piece, it just doesn't even know how to lie. Right. You know, it's not going to fool you. It's not going to manipulate you. It's like, no, actually, you got to go here. It's when we stop listening to our inner wisdom is when we get in trouble. When we don't hear that inner voice, that whisper, that's like, no. But we're like, yeah, but you don't really know what you're talking about, because this is so good. And we're experiencing something so beautiful. And lots of people are coming now. Right. And it's like, I like this. I like this bigness. I like it's sexy. It's like, it's fast, it's moving, it's growing, and people's lives are being changed. And that's what boxes do. Like, you come into a box and you're like, oh, this is a Costco. Yeah. There's like food, and there's samplings, and there's socks for $1. And you're like, this is amazing. Like, what is this? This is called Costco. And even Costco has to reinvent itself, or it's going to die. Right. Like, even these big supermarkets and stores and places like Lowe's and Home Depot, eventually they got to, like, you have to change, or you're going to die. You're going to have a shelf life. And so maybe that's like these spiritual spaces, these spaces where people are wanting to come together to do something common good. Yeah. Like, there's nothing wrong with you and your friends going, you know what? I actually want us to assemble every week, and we're going to get together for the sole purpose of connecting with each other. We're actually going to read some scripture together because it's valuable. And then we're going to, like, take care of the poor, or we're going to gather up money and we're going to find a cause. But then that has the potential of turning into something. Yeah. And then it becomes like, what did we just do? Now we just created the very thing we hated. And isn't that crazy? And we named it. Yeah. We gave it a name, and then we're like, oh my God, we probably should let the government know we exist. People are giving money to this and they need tax write-off. And you're like, oh my God, you're losing the soul of this thing. And
it's crazy.
So yeah, that's a compelling thought. Yeah. So you've messed with my mind, John Caliguire.
I've been messing with my own mind, so it's good to have someone in the chaos with me. Yeah. I mean, the thought that kind of sticks out is like, oh, maybe church is a process that we go through. Maybe it's not a thing we build. Maybe
that's it right there.
Yeah.
It's a process we go through, maybe not a thing that we build.
Yeah, that might be it. I don't know.
You just solved it.
Maybe.
You solved it. Right there. And I think that's it, because that's human. Yeah. That's what we're doing as human beings. We're going through a process. I'm not trying to build something for myself. I'm going through a process of becoming. Yes. Like the person that, like, getting back to our inner child. Mm-hmm. Like that inner child who's left alone or disappointed or hurt or rejected or who's angry. It's like, maybe the goal is to get back to our playfulness. And like, that child is, people come into the world and they're perfect. I'm convinced they're perfect. Yeah. And any storyline that says you come into the world and you're already screwed, I'm like, oh God, I can't do this. Yeah. Because I look at babies and I'm like, they don't know anything. They're just a tub of goo and beauty and they're just looking at everything going, just download into my brain, tell me what I need to believe. They're like they're a computer. Yeah. And they're just downloading. And then they're mimicking everything that you're telling them to believe or think, or this is how you act and this is how you do relationships. And that by the age of 7, they've already got their downloads completely installed. Right. And then they start living. Yeah. And it's like they're perfect. They come into the world perfect. It's what they call original blessing. Yeah. And not this original sin thing. It's like, now you come into the world, you're already blessed. You're already connected. You already have everything you need. Right. You are created in the image of the divine. You're beautiful. Right. Look at you. And then we tell them along the way, actually, you're not. You're screwed up and you're broken and you're
and you've been like that since you came out the womb.
God, like, oh my gosh, like what a terrible start. Yeah. How does that not end in disaster, right? Totally. And people breaking down. Yeah. versus like, what if I need to get back to this, get back to my beginning, my essence of I'm good.
Yeah.
And I'm okay. And that's the process part. Instead of building something, it's like, I just got to get back to that inner John Caliguire that's always been there.
Right. And maybe sometimes part of that is letting a good thing die, you know?
Yes. I was part of a church community in Northern California that had a 12-year run. And they were trying not to be a machine.
Yeah.
So like you described this community in South Denver.
Yeah.
We're not trying to do this. We're not trying to build something. We're just trying to be something.
Yeah.
And then eventually it tries to build something because that's the human need.
Yeah.
But this community was called Open Door, great community. And after 12 years, they went through a discernment process and decided, that's it.
That's so cool.
And it was great.
Yeah.
They celebrated it. They said thank you. They talked about great stories of transformation. So it actually did what it was designed to do.
Yeah.
And then at that 12-year period, that's the reinventing piece that I think institutions need to do. And I don't know what it is. If there's like a magic number, like, is it 7 years? Is it 8 years? But we do it in relationships. We do it in marriage.
Yeah.
Like eventually you have to come and go, this isn't working anymore. We probably need to make some changes, or a different version of me is required in order to change this relationship. So I gotta grow up.
Sure.
I gotta tap into myself. But to watch a community end after 12 years was like, well done. You did it.
Something beautiful rather than something that you're like,
instead of trying to just keep it going.
Yeah.
And asking people for more money. Like, if we just get 12 more people to tithe more, then
we can have another 12 years.
We can keep the machine on.
Yeah.
And they're like, we don't want to be a machine.
Yeah.
And then everybody went their ways. And there's still some people that experience meaningful connection. But they're not, the thing is like they did this thing and now they're not part of another thing.
Yeah.
So that's the question mark. It's like, okay, that was a 12-year run. It was great. They're like, now go to another church. It's like, nah, we're not doing it. Because there's not really any other spaces where people are living with this idea of, we're just in process.
Right.
And we don't need to build something. It's like, okay, then where am I going to go? I don't know.
I guess you just got to be that somewhere else, man.
Be it somewhere else and be it with each other.
Yeah.
And live into that. Here in Colorado, who are kind of done. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Really, thank you for being done with it. Don't keep building the same thing that we've been building. Please.
Yeah.
For God's sake, don't do it. Create something more beautiful. And instead of telling yourself the narrative of, yeah, we left the church. It's like, I don't know. Maybe you did. Maybe you left the church, or you certainly didn't leave Christianity.
Right.
And maybe it's that word needs to expand and it needs to be reinvented. I don't know. Imagine that. That sounds sacrilegious, right?
Yeah.
Like change Christianity. We can't do that.
No.
But I think there's, again, getting back to looking for different language to give people language to their experience might be a better way forward. Whatever that is, that way forward is what I'm interested in. So I'm like walking away from this conversation going, I'm just deeply encouraged of like, it even deepens my knowing of something is coming in. It's really good.
Same
I'm beyond hope. I'm into knowing, and I love it.
I love that, man. Dude, well, John, thanks so much for your time. And this has been
you.
Really great. And I'm sure we'll be together on the mic again one day.
So.
Yeah.
In San Clemente.
In San Clemente next time. Yeah, for sure. Well, cheers, man. Thanks.
All right. Peace.